Have you ever witnessed someone cross a line so unforgivable that your entire world narrows to a single point of rage and clarity? That's exactly what happened when Victoria Harrington, the self-appointed Queen of Pinewood Estates HOA, deliberately aimed a firework at my disabled daughter's specialized wheelchair tray. My name is James Sullivan, a 48-year-old county sheriff who moved to Pinewood Estates 3 years ago, seeking a peaceful community for my 16-year-old daughter, Emma. Born with cerebral palsy, Emma uses a specialized wheelchair with an adaptive tray that holds her communication device, water bottle, and medical supplies. For us, accessibility isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. Our troubles began when Victoria Harrington became HOA president 6 months ago. A former corporate executive with a penchant for perfect aesthetics, Victoria immediately targeted our home's wheelchair ramp, claiming it violated HOA guidelines despite being legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I politely explained the federal laws protecting accessibility modifications, even providing documentation from Emma's doctors. But Victoria seemed personally offended by any challenge to her authority. The situation escalated during the community's 4th of July celebration. Emma and I were enjoying the neighborhood barbecue when Victoria approached, clipboard in hand, to inform me that Emma's wheelchair was obstructing the walkway and needed to be moved to a designated area away from the festivities. When I refused, explaining that isolating my daughter would constitute discrimination, Victoria's face contorted with rage. "This is my community and I decide what's acceptable here," she hissed, loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear. "If you can't follow the rules, maybe you should live somewhere more appropriate for your situation." As the fireworks display began, Victoria disappeared into the crowd, only to return minutes later with what she called a harmless sparkler. Before I could react, she deliberately aimed it at Emma, sending sparks directly onto the specialized tray attached to Emma's wheelchair. The tray, which held Emma's communication device and medical supplies, caught fire immediately. Emma's terrified scream as she tried to push herself away from the flames will haunt me forever. I extinguished the fire quickly, but not before Emma suffered first-degree burns on her stomach and arms. Her $8,000 communication device was destroyed, along with emergency medication she keeps on her tray. As neighbors rushed to help, Victoria stood watching, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Accidents happen," she said with a shrug. "Maybe next time you'll respect our community guidelines." What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have known as a relatively new resident, was that beneath my casual dad exterior was 23 years of law enforcement experience. As County Sheriff James Sullivan, I'd spent my career upholding the law and protecting the vulnerable, and Victoria Harrington had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Have you ever faced discrimination or bullying because of a disability or while advocating for a loved one with special needs? How did you handle it, and what do you wish you could have done differently? Share your experiences in the comments below. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting pale stripes across Emma's bandaged arms. I watched her chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory. The doctors had assured me the burns would heal, but the haunted look in her eyes when she was awake told a different story. Emma, my resilient, bright daughter, now startled at loud noises and flinched at the sight of the hospital's cleaning cart, its metal wheels echoing down the corridor. The trauma wasn't just physical. It had carved itself into her spirit. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from neighbors pinged one after another, some offering support, others defending Victoria, calling the firework incident just an unfortunate accident. But what struck me most were the private confession stories of Victoria's intimidation. Her pattern of targeting the vulnerable, elderly residents fined forgotten gnomes, single parents threatened with liens over toys left out, veterans cited for incorrectly displayed flags. Pinewood Estates, beneath its manicured lawns, was a community divided and afraid. I scrolled through the messages, anger simmering beneath my exhaustion. As sheriff, I'd seen bullies before, but Victoria's reach was deeper than I'd realized. She'd built an empire of fear, and now she was trying to paint herself as the victim. A soft knock at the door drew me from my thoughts. A nurse peeked in. "Sheriff Sullivan, there's a woman here to see you," Says she's a neighbor and has information about what happened to Emma. I stepped into the corridor and found Martha Jenkins waiting. Martha, a retired civil rights attorney with a reputation for tenacity, lived 3 doors down. She held a manila folder and a flash drive, her expression grave. "James, I'm so sorry about Emma," she said quietly. "What Victoria did wasn't an accident. I have proof. We found an empty family lounge." Martha set the folder on the table and slid the flash drive toward me. "I've been documenting Victoria's abuses for months. She targets anyone she thinks won't fight back: the elderly, single parents, people with disabilities." I recognized the pattern. I set up cameras on my property after she tried to find me for my rose bushes. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The first video showed Victoria in her backyard, hours before the 4th of July barbecue. She was testing fireworks, aiming them at cardboard boxes set atop a table, measuring the range with a tape measure. She repeated the test several times, adjusting the angle, making notes on a clipboard. The intent was unmistakable. "She planned this, James," Martha said, her voice tight. "She knew exactly what she was doing." She handed me the folder. "There's more. I've been tracking the HOA's finances. Victoria's been embezzling over $200,000 diverted to a personal account in the last 6 months. I've included copies of the bank statements and a summary of the transactions." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. Victoria's abuses had cost people their sense of safety, their money, their dignity, and now she'd escalated to violence. My phone rang. Deputy Chief Rodriguez's number flashed on the screen. "Boss, you need to know something," he said without preamble. "Victoria Harrington just filed a formal complaint against you. She claims you threatened her at the barbecue and is demanding your badge. She's also requesting a restraining order against you and Emma." For a moment, I was speechless. The audacity was staggering. Victoria wasn't just covering her tracks, she was going on the offensive, leveraging her connections. I remembered a rumor I'd heard at the last HOA meeting. Victoria's brother-in-law was a county commissioner. Now her strategy made sense. She was trying to neutralize me before I could act. But what Victoria didn't realize was that her attack on Emma had crossed more than a moral line. She'd committed assault and battery, and her targeting of Emma, a minor with a disability, meant hate crime statutes could apply. These weren't HOA rules she could bend. These were real laws with real consequences. I updated Rodriguez, outlining Martha's evidence. "Secure the originals," I told him, "and start a quiet inquiry into Victoria's finances. We need to move carefully. She's got eyes everywhere." As dusk fell, I left the hospital. Emma finally sleeping under sedation. The air outside was thick with humidity and tension. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its windows tinted. Inside, 2 men watched the entrance, cameras in hand. I recognized them: private security contractors Victoria had recently hired as HOA compliance officers. They were photographing everyone who entered or exited the hospital. Victoria had escalated from harassment to surveillance, flexing her power in plain sight. But she had no idea what was coming next. I drove home, mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to protect Emma, to shield her from further harm. But I also knew that if I let Victoria's intimidation tactics work, she'd win not just against us, but against every resident she'd bullied. That night, I began assembling a case file. I cataloged Martha's evidence, cross-referenced the HOA's bylaws with federal accessibility statutes, and drafted a timeline of Victoria's actions. I reached out to neighbors who'd messaged me, asking for formal statements. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of Victoria's abuses. I also documented Emma's trauma. Per the hospital psychologist's advice, she'd withdrawn, refusing to use her communication device even when the hospital provided a temporary replacement. She startled at sudden noises, her body tensing involuntarily. I noted each incident, knowing that the psychological impact would be as important as the physical evidence. By midnight, I had a plan. I would bring Victoria's crimes into the light: her assault on Emma, her pattern of discrimination, her financial misdeeds. I would do it by the book, refusing to stoop to her level. and I would not let her connections shield her from justice. As I closed Emma's bedroom door, I promised her quietly, fiercely, that I would not rest until Victoria was held accountable. For Emma, for our neighbors, for everyone who deserved to feel safe in their own home. The investigation had begun, and this time the bully had picked the wrong family. Emma came home from the hospital 3 days after the attack, her arm still bandaged but her spirit visibly dimmed. I had spent those days in a blur of sleepless nights, compiling evidence, interviewing neighbors, and building a case against Victoria Harrington that was damning in both scope and detail. To avoid any conflict of interest as county sheriff and as Emma's father, I formally handed the official investigation to Deputy Chief Rodriguez while I continued to gather evidence as a private citizen and victim's parent. What we uncovered was far worse than I'd imagined. Victoria hadn't just targeted my family, she had systematically weaponized the Pinewood Estates HOA against the most vulnerable residents. Elderly homeowners were fined for trivial infractions, forced into financial distress, and in several cases, pressured to sell their homes at a loss to Victoria's brother-in-law's real estate company. Single parents found themselves drowning in violation notices for toys in the yard or basketball hoops, with fines that doubled if they dared contest them. The pattern was unmistakable: intimidation, selective enforcement, and exploitation for personal gain. Most disturbing of all were Victoria's so-called HOA compliance officers, 3 men with checkered pasts, hired under the guise of community security. They wore uniforms and badges designed to mimic law enforcement, and they used those trappings to enter properties without permission, intimidate residents, and even physically detain a teenager for the crime of wearing a hoodie while checking his mail. It was impersonation of law enforcement, a criminal offense that carried real penalties. This goes way beyond HOA overreach, Rodriguez told me during one of our daily briefings. We're looking at fraud, embezzlement, impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful detention, and in Emma's case, assault with intent to cause bodily harm, possibly with hate crime enhancements. Victoria, meanwhile, escalated her campaign against us. While Emma recovered at home, our mailbox filled with violation notices. For the wheelchair ramp, for Emma's therapy equipment in the yard, even for the medical transport van parked in our driveway. Each notice came with a fine more outrageous than the last, culminating in a threat of property lien if we didn't pay within 72 hours. The harassment was relentless, targeted, and clearly meant to break us down. The surveillance continued as well. Victoria's officers maintained a near-constant presence on our street, photographing visitors and following my movements. When Emma's physical therapist arrived for a session, one of the men tried to block her entry, insisting she needed HOA approval for commercial activities. I documented every incident, every violation notice, every encounter, methodically building a case as I'd been trained to do. But Victoria's next move forced my hand sooner than I'd planned. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the station, finalizing reports, when my phone rang. Lisa, Emma's caregiver. Her voice panicked. Victoria and 2 of her security men had entered our home, claiming authority to inspect for violations. When Lisa tried to stop them, showing them Emma's medical equipment and explaining its necessity, Victoria laughed. "This junk is exactly the problem," she sneered, gesturing at Emma's spare communication device and adaptive equipment. "This isn't a hospital. It's a residential neighborhood. Either clean it up or move out." When Lisa attempted to record the intrusion on her phone, one of Victoria's men physically restrained her while Victoria continued photographing Emma's equipment, making derogatory comments about eyesores and property values. Most chillingly, Victoria approached Emma directly, leaned down, and whispered something that left my daughter in tears, too shaken to even type out what had been said. By the time I raced home, they were gone. Emma was in the throes of a panic attack, her breathing shallow, her body rigid with fear. I sat with her, guiding her through the breathing exercises her therapist had taught us, holding her hand until she finally calmed enough to type on her backup device. "Your father can't protect you forever. Accidents happen to stubborn people who don't follow rules." Victoria had just threatened my child in our own home. I called Rodriguez and relayed the latest events. He was furious. "That's criminal trespass, unlawful restraint, and intimidation all on top of everything else. We'll move forward with charges immediately. The storm that had been gathering for weeks was about to break. Victoria Harrington had crossed every legal and moral line. She had used her position to terrorize the vulnerable, exploit the powerless, and now directly threaten my family. But she had underestimated the resolve of a father and a sheriff who would stop at nothing to protect his child and his community. I spent that night documenting every detail, backing up video footage, securing statements from Lisa and Emma's therapist, and preparing a formal complaint. I contacted a civil rights attorney specializing in HOA abuse and disability discrimination, who confirmed what I already suspected. Victoria's actions weren't just civil violations, they were criminal acts, and the evidence was overwhelming. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once been silent out of fear began to reach out, emboldened by the prospect of justice. Some shared stories of their own harassment. Others offered to testify. The tide was turning. As I tucked Emma into bed, I promised her that Victoria would never hurt her or anyone else in Pinewood Estates again. The storm was here, and this time the reckoning would be public, legal, and final. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 7 p.m. at the Pinewood Estates Community Center. Victoria Harrington's email had called it urgent, citing security concerns and compliance issues. But the real agenda, according to neighbors who'd shared her private communications with me, was to push through a special assessment to fund her private security force and grant her officers formal authority to enter residents' properties at will. I arrived early, this time in full sheriff's uniform, a rare sight in my own neighborhood. Emma insisted on coming with me. She typed, "I need to face her. I'm not hiding anymore." Martha Jenkins and a dozen other residents who had agreed to testify about Victoria's abuses joined us in the front row. By 7 o'clock, the community center was packed. Tension hung in the air as Victoria swept in, flanked by her security team and board members. Her practiced smile faltered when she saw my uniform, but she quickly regained her composure. "Welcome, everyone," she began, tapping her gavel. "We have serious matters to discuss tonight regarding community safety and compliance. I stood. Point of order. Before this meeting continues, I need to address an urgent matter of public safety." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Sheriff Sullivan, while we appreciate your professional interest, this is an HOA meeting governed by our bylaws. You'll have to wait for the public comment period." "I'm not here as a resident," I replied, voice steady. "I'm here in my official capacity as county sheriff." I nodded to Deputy Rodriguez, who entered with 4 uniformed officers. "Victoria Harrington, you and your associates are under investigation for multiple criminal offenses: fraud, embezzlement, assault, unlawful detention, and impersonation of law enforcement personnel." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept the room. Victoria's security men moved toward me, hands drifting to their belts where they carried tasers designed to look like police-issue equipment. Victoria raised her voice above the commotion. "That's enough. This is a private meeting on private property. Sheriff or not, you have no jurisdiction here without a warrant." "Actually, I do." I produced a document. "This is a search warrant for all HOA financial records, communications, and security footage. And this I held up a second document, is an arrest warrant for you, Victoria, specifically relating to the assault on my daughter Emma with a firework on July 4th. Now classified as a hate crime against a person with disabilities." Victoria's mask cracked. "This is absurd. It was an accident, and your daughter's wheelchair and equipment violate our community standards." The board voted Martha Jenkins rose beside me. "The board voted based on fraudulent information. As a former civil rights attorney, I can confirm that any HOA rule preventing reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities violates the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The board's vote is not just unethical, it's illegal." One of Victoria's security men made a fatal mistake, reaching for his taser. Deputy Rodriguez moved swiftly, intercepting and subduing him. The man's fake badge and unauthorized weapon were confiscated, confirming what we'd suspected. None of Victoria's officers had proper licensing or training. As officers moved to take Victoria into custody, She made a desperate lunge toward Emma, her voice shrill. "She's faking it. I've seen her stand up when no one's watching. They're scamming all of you for sympathy." The room fell silent. The naked prejudice and ignorance in Victoria's outburst stunning even her staunchest supporters. Emma, trembling but resolute, maneuvered her wheelchair forward and typed a message. The room's sound system projected her words. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not leaving my home." Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still shouting about property values and community standards. Her security team was disarmed and detained. The remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Harold, the elderly vice president who had always seemed cowed by Victoria, approached the microphone. "I think," he said quietly, "we need to call for an emergency election of new board members, and perhaps a complete review of our community guidelines." The confrontation had exposed not just Victoria's crimes, but the toxic culture she had fostered, one that allowed discrimination and harassment to flourish under the guise of community standards. Residents who had once been silent now stood and spoke, sharing stories of intimidation and unfair fines, their voices growing stronger with each account. Martha Jenkins addressed the crowd. "Let this be a turning point. We must ensure that no one in this community is ever targeted or excluded because of disability, age, or family status. Our rules must protect everyone, not empower bullies." As the meeting adjourned, neighbors approached Emma and me, offering apologies, support, and thanks. For the first time, Emma smiled a small, genuine smile that told me she felt safe again. The process of healing and rebuilding would take time. There would be investigations, lawsuits, and policy changes. But the most powerful moment of the night belonged to Emma, who had faced her tormentor and reclaimed her voice. In that moment, the community saw her not as a victim, but as a survivor and a catalyst for change. Victoria Harrington's reign was over. Pinewood Estates would never be the same, but this time, that was a promise of hope. Victoria Harrington's arrest sent shockwaves far beyond Pinewood Estates. Headlines blared, HOA president charged with hate crime against disabled teen. The story ignited national debate about HOA overreach, disability rights, and the dangers of unchecked authority in residential communities. News vans lined the streets for days, and messages poured in from families across the country who had faced similar abuses but never dared to speak out. As the investigation deepened, the full extent of Victoria's schemes emerged. Forensic accountants traced over $200,000 embezzled from HOA funds, funneled through kickbacks from contractors and padded invoices. She had orchestrated a systematic campaign against the vulnerable. Elderly homeowners fined into financial distress and pressured to sell their homes at a loss to her brother-in-law's real estate company. Single parents targeted for trivial violations, and families like mine harassed for simply trying to live with dignity. The most chilling discovery came from Victoria's seized electronic devices. There, investigators found detailed profiles on dozens of undesirable residents she wanted removed from Pinewood Estates. Emma and I were at the top of her list. The firework attack wasn't a moment of impulsive cruelty, it was the culmination of a calculated campaign to drive us out, to make our lives so unbearable that we would leave on our own. 3 weeks after Victoria's arrest, Pinewood Estates held a community-wide meeting to elect a new HOA board and rewrite the bylaws. The turnout was unprecedented. Over 90% of homeowners participated, many for the first time. The mood was somber but determined. Everyone understood that this was a chance to reclaim the soul of the neighborhood. Martha Jenkins was unanimously elected as the new HOA president. The board she led was the most diverse in the community's history. Seniors, parents of young children, longtime residents, and Harold, the once timid vice president who had found his voice as a passionate advocate for transparency and fairness. Their first act was to pass a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy, explicitly protecting residents with disabilities and guaranteeing that accessibility modifications like Emma's ramp would never again be questioned. They also disbanded Victoria's so-called security force, replacing it with a true neighborhood watch program focused on safety, not intimidation. But the transformation wasn't just in the rules. It was in the people. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped to chat with Emma, learning to communicate with her through her device and discovering the bright, witty teenager behind the wheelchair. The community rallied to rebuild Emma's therapy space in our backyard, transforming it into an accessible garden filled with flowers, butterflies, and laughter. Emma's physical therapist, once harassed by Victoria's guards, was now welcomed as a valued member of our extended family. 6 months later, as autumn painted Pinewood Estates in brilliant golds and reds, we hosted a community barbecue in our new backyard garden. Emma, who had made remarkable progress in her therapy, demonstrated her new communication system to a group of fascinated children. I watched from the grill, exchanging smiles with Martha and the neighbors who had stood with us through the darkest days. Victoria's trial was scheduled for the following month. She faced multiple felony charges, including hate crimes, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her former officers had accepted plea deals in exchange for their testimony, revealing how she had instructed them to target specific residents and fabricate violations. The county had also launched an investigation into her brother-in-law's real estate practices, uncovering a pattern of predatory purchases from distressed homeowners. As the evening wound down and neighbors helped clean up, Harold approached me with a cold beer and a thoughtful expression. "You know, James," he said, "I've lived here for 20 years, and this is the first time it's truly felt like a community rather than just a collection of houses. It took something terrible to wake us up, but I think we're better for it." He was right. Pinewood Estates had transformed from a neighborhood ruled by fear and conformity to one defined by mutual support and respect for differences. Emma was thriving, no longer isolated but embraced as a valued community member. And I had found a new purpose beyond my role as sheriff, working with Martha to draft model HOA anti-discrimination policies that were being adopted by communities across the state. Victoria Harrington had intended to drive us out, seeing Emma's disability as an affront to her vision of a perfect community. Instead, she had inadvertently created something far more valuable: a neighborhood that recognized that true community comes not from enforced conformity, but from celebrating and supporting our differences. The journey was not without scars. Emma still had moments of anxiety, and I still caught myself watching for shadows where none should be. But the fear that once haunted our home had been replaced by hope and by the knowledge that we were not alone. If you've ever faced discrimination or bullying because of a disability or while advocating for a loved one with special needs, I hope our story gives you courage. Sometimes standing your ground not only protects your rights but can transform an entire community. Thank you for reading. If our journey resonated with you, share your own experiences below. Your story might help someone else find their voice, and together, we can build communities where everyone belongs.